I recall as a child, I was perhaps 7 or 8 years old. I had one of my favorite desserts was one that my mom made during the almond season, harvesting almonds. My aunt had an extensive farm with that included almond trees, and so my mother had a good source of almonds, and she would make an almond brittle. In Sicilian, it's called a cubaita. And so I recall it vividly because she would invite me to help her make it. It's a simple recipe, basically. It's lightly roasted almonds and sugar and honey. So after the almonds are lightly roasted, she would then caramelize the sugar and add the honey, and then mix everything together and then put it on a flat skillet. We had a brick oven, and she would put it in there, and occasionally we would see if it was ready, maybe 15-20 minutes at the most. So when it came out, the biggest pleasure I had was that I was given the privilege of cutting it into small rectangles, and I would have the first picks, and it was one of the most delicious desserts, and my mouth waters as I'm thinking about it, and I see my mother and I doing it together. So it's a wonderful memory of my mother, of the country I came from Sicily, and brings a lot of flashbacks of the time. I will put a recipe together, and perhaps it will be utilized to replicate that. My wife, Nancy, she makes it occasionally for me. But the sentiment, remains, connected to my mother.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm the administrator of the Garibaldi-Meucci Museum. I originally was going to talk of a special memory of my great-grandma, and I was going to talk about her cabbage soup, kapusta, but it would have taken too long. But I have a very fond memory of my time with my great-grandma. We used to go out to New Jersey, where she had a country place. She had a lot of property. It was out in the woods, and her garden was like half the property, where she would grow all kinds of vegetables, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, which she'd make her kapusta and stuffed cabbage from, and coleslaw, cucumbers, where she'd make her pickles, and she'd have fruit trees, apple trees, and peach trees, and she'd make her pies. And my grandfather had his grapevines where he made his wine and kept it in the cellar. Every morning, excuse me, I'd hear her, not every morning, but she'd call and say, "Stefania, come," and I'd come, and if she had a basket in her hand, I knew I was going to be crossing the dirt road and going into the woods to the chicken farm to get fresh eggs from the hen house. And we'd have a wonderful breakfast. So she called me later on, and she had a pail in her hand. I knew I was going to go pick blueberries. And I would go out the back and pass these two tall trees that my great-grandfather built me the coolest swing, and past bungalows where he would take people in from Russia who didn't have jobs. He would feed them and get them on their feet. And I'd pass a fire pit where I'd go burn garbage with my great-grandpa, which I thought was really cool back then. And then I'd go into the woods, and there were it seemed like a million blueberries bushes, and I'd take the pail and I'd come home. The pail wouldn't always be full because it seemed like I'd pick a bunch and eat a bunch. And when I get home, great-grandma, we'd go in the kitchen, and she'd say, "Good job, Stefania." And we'd stand over the kitchen, big old farmhouse kitchen sink. I'd have to stand on a footstool. And while we picked through the blueberries, she would tell me in her broken English stories. And even though I didn't understand Russian, it seemed like I understood everything she said because it was coming from her heart. After we cleaned it, she would just sprinkle a little sugar on top and put it in a big bowl and drizzle some water and put it in the icebox. Later, after dinner, she'd bring out these big ceramic bowls. None of them matched. And she'd give us a hunk of her sponge cake and pour those beautiful blueberries over it with some of that blueberry juice. And a big dollop of sour cream, because Russians put sour cream on everything. And it was just a fond memory. And even though she's been gone almost 55 years, I learned so much from her. And so, Great Grandma, I miss you. Happy Mother's Day in heaven.
Hi, happy Mother's Day. My mom was a great cook. From her simple lamb chops pizzaiolo, which my sons loved, to her much more involved homemade ravioli, homemade gavardil, homemade zeppoli, which tasted just like the feast. She made a special pie at Christmas, which everyone looked forward to, everyone loved. It was an onion calzone, an onion pie. And the recipe was brought with her and her family from Torito in Bari, Italy, over 100 years ago. It was an oil crust pie dough, and it was filled with steamed onions, black pepper, oil, raisins, anchovies, grated cheese, plum tomatoes, and then covered with another pie crust dough and baked in the oven. So my mother passes away over 20 years ago. It's Christmas. And my sister and I say, gee, we don't have an onion pie. Well, I had watched my mother make the onion pie, but never really concentrated on it, and certainly didn't take notes. But my sister Angela and I decided that, well, we would give it a try. We kind of knew the ingredients. It was that oil crust pie that we weren't sure if we would know how to make. So we tried it, the dough, a couple of times, and it didn't work out right. So we bought the Pillsbury pie crust dough, which was in those long red boxes. Now we bring it home and then we realize they're round. The pans my mother always used was those black and white speckled enamel pans. And we couldn't change that because that would just break tradition. It wouldn't be good luck. So Angela figures out a way to turn these round doughs into a rectangle. And she did it. She cut some, she pasted some, whatever. And she put it into the rectangular pan. We filled it, we covered it, we pinched all around the edges to seal it. Now it doesn't have the oil component. So we feel, you know what? We're going to brush the top of the pie with oil. Then we had to put a little hole in the middle to let the steam out, which my mother always said would do. And she always took a little piece of dough, wrapped it around her finger, and put it in that hole. And she said it was the belly button. So Angela and I are still saying it's the belly button. And we have been making this pie for over 20 years. And in fact, Sophia, my 17-year-old granddaughter, has joined us about 4 or 5 years ago, and she's been making the pie with us. So I know that this recipe, this tradition, will live on in America for many more years. It came from Bari, and it's now in America, and that's where it will be. The funny part is my husband, Frank, never knew we bought the dough, never knew we doctored the dough. And when he tasted on Christmas Day, when he tastes it and says, oh, delicious, Angela, Fran, Sophia, great job. I know it was a success. So thank you, Mom, for a delicious recipe, and happy Mother's Day to all.